Okay, here's another tutorial on how to manipulate a model. In this particular video, what I'm doing is I've been asked by the person that commissioned this 8M Archer to add a couple more poses to the model, and these two poses would be right here. One is going to be more of a brace stance, and then the other one will be kind of a walking stance. And I thought I would go through the process of how to do these pretty quickly. Now, I will say, just like on the cooking shows, you know, I've already prepared some stuff up front to cut down on the recording time. So what I've done for this model is I have taken what was a solid leg from the previous version, and I separated all the shells and then went back and carefully locked in, you know, the upper leg, the lower leg, and the foot as separate items, which I have right here, and you can see they're turned off. I've also done the same thing with the forearm, upper arm, and the hand. Because what I'm going to be doing is manipulating the angles of these and the knees and the foot. So the original right leg, I just have it turned off, and I have saved this as a new file, 8M2, which that way if I ever mess this up, I can always go back to my 8M original and I don't have to worry about it. So if drive space isn't an issue for you, you can do that. What I'm going to be doing today is just changing some of the angles to give this mech the look that it is in a crouching stance. And since this will actually be a pretty symmetrical pose, what I'm going to be doing is turning off the left leg, and I'm going to be doing all of the work on the right side in this case and manipulate these, because this is a duplicate of the original right arm, which is here, but that's hidden, and I have removed the original right leg. So now what I have is the three parts of the leg as separate pieces. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to pose the leg. So I'm going to turn off a few things here to give myself a little cleaner area. And all we're really going to be doing is, you know, bending this a little bit and making sure that the foot stays flat. The angle that it's at right now is pretty good. We're just going to squat it a little bit, and then we'll move everything down to where it needs to go. I wanted to show you a trick that I had to learn about. Now there is a video out there that I use myself for whenever I need to reorient a part, and I'll put that link in the description of this video because the person doing that explains it a lot better than I do, and I'll just be regurgitating the same thing they do, and honestly I'll probably not do as good a job. So there's a tool in here called Create Pivot, and what that does is that you can do a couple of different things with it. One of the things you can do is reorient a part, where you're basically, if it's like a slightly twisted, as I've said in previous videos, like if you want to stretch it and you're getting that warpage, you need to line the item up first so that it's nice and square with your angles, and then when you stretch it, it'll be a consistent stretch as opposed to a skewed one. Now that's the tool that you'll be using, and that description video will cover how to use that to reorient an object. But another thing that you can do with this is pretty cool, is when you go to create a pivot, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop a pivot here. Where is it? No, I want bounding box, and world frame, and I'm going to just drop my pivot. Nope, cancel that. Didn't put it in the right place. Create pivot, and then I'm trying to aim for the center. Well, it's not going to do, but I guess that'll do. Fine. Drop, and done. All right. Now, what this does, if you'll notice, no matter where I turn on the object, the pivot is always visible. What I was trying to do was put this dead center of this socket. And what this would do is it would give me my orientation for where the upper leg is, because you can see through it. And so what that would do is it would give me a visual to aim for, so that when I'm doing these adjustments to rotating the socket here, sometimes when you rotate something, it throws it off, and you're going back and you're trying to line it back up with that hole. Well, what dropping a pivot down will do is it will give you that center point. So say, for example, if you were trying to put a peg through the center torso, and you wanted to make sure that your torso lined up with the peg, you could do it that way, and you could see there's the dead center of the object, and you can see it from every angle, and you can know that you're lined up. So that's just a great way to give yourself a visual reference without having to take a lot of guesswork on it. Now, in this particular case, it rotated just fine right along the axis, and I'm not really off, so that's not going to serve any purpose here. But I'm going to go ahead and accept this change in the angle, and now I'm going to change the angle of the lower leg, and you can see how it's throwing things off a little bit because it's rotating on its own axis. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this a little bit like that, and that's intersecting into the foot too much, so maybe I'll just bring that forward. Maybe not quite so ridiculous, and we'll call that pretty good. Okay, so one of the things that you might run into when you do something like this is you'll notice that because I've rotated the upper leg, and now it's intersecting down over the foot, it might leave a little gap here where there's nothing really going on inside, where you can see, like it's exposing the under mechanics here of where the foot would still be attaching. So in this case, what we might want to do is just throw a little object in here. In this case, we're going to just do a square, and we're going to kind of line this up roughly, and we'll move it up into the object, and maybe we'll angle it here, and let's do that. And that's a simple enough fix right there that you could leave that alone. If you wanted to make this a little more interesting, what we could do is we could go here, and we're going to do a tube, and in this case I dropped it on the floor, so that means that it is too big, but it is flatly oriented with the rest of the environment. So what I'm going to do here, this is pretty cool, I do this a lot. I'm going to take this object, and I'm going to reduce it a little bit, and I'm going to bring it over here, and obviously it's buried in there, and we're going to get some angles right. I'm going to bring this guy into the mix, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make what looks to be like a piston in a very simple way. So first I'm going to do the lower part of the piston, and you can see that will be down here coming off of the foot. Okay, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller because this is the part that's actually going to go up into the other piston. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this so they're perfectly oriented and they are at the same angle and everything. And I'm just going to move this one up to where they just barely overlap, and then I'm just going to enlarge this one just a bit. And because it enlarges in every direction, I have to move it up. And there you can see we've got the makings of what looks to be a hydraulic addition to the foot. Okay, and then I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to go ahead and combine it. I don't have to. I can just duplicate it as it is. But I'm going to go ahead and combine it and then just hit duplicate and move it over. And maybe I'll change the angle just a little bit there. And let's move it out so that they're more in alignment. But now you can see that I've added just 3 different pieces in here, the square and then some cylinders, and I've added in now what makes the foot a lot more interesting because it is showing a little more detail than you would have seen in the original model. And that gives us some more interesting objects that will show up in the final model, as well as making sure that you don't have these ungainly gaps and everything in here. Now this looks pretty good to me, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save here. And one of the other things that you have to do when you are posing a mech is you have to take into account how the body would also move around. So what I'm going to do is I am going to turn back on the arm and the upper body and the waist and the center torso and all these parts, and I'm going to select them all so that I can hit transform at the same time. As a matter of fact, let me do this. Let's do the left arm as well. And we don't need the leg. We don't need we can do the original right arm as well. Just in case everything needs to be the same angles. Alright, so what we're going to do is come here, and then we're going to do, got to get the waist, and we have to get the right upper arm, the right hand, and the right forearm. Okay, so that's basically everything on this model that is not the legs. And since we're doing this pose, what we're going to do is orient everything all at the same time. And we're going to do a little bit of a squat here. As you can see, everything moves at the same rate. And because we're changing the angles, certain things may smash into the others. Now that's about as far as I can go, because you'll see right there that the thigh armor is actually hitting into the waist armor. And so I wouldn't want to go any farther than that, even though I could go more extreme because they'll just pass through each other. I want to try and keep this somewhat realistic if I can. I could splay the foot out a little more, make it a bit more dramatic. So let's go ahead and accept this torso rotation, and let's change a few things here. Let's turn this guy a little bit, and you can see we changed a couple of little angles there, and that stuff adds up, believe me. When you start making these subtle adjustments in little turns, it creates the impression of a great deal of movement that normally we don't think about, but when you see it, your eye actually says, oh, this shows some dynamic movement, and this other figure doesn't, and you can't figure out necessarily why. Why does this one look, more appealing and the other one doesn't? And even if you're not trained artistically in understanding, what is actually going on by what the artist did, your brain fills in the difference because it knows what's supposed to be there and what isn't. So on some level, your brain is going, this is not right, or this is right. And that's one of the things that I aim for, is making sure that that sense of organic movement is conveyed in the positioning of these things, so that it's not just, oh, let me just rotate it along, a 90-degree axis and call it good. You have to add that little touch of a twist or a rotation here and there, and it really makes all the difference in the world to your model when you are trying to get these poses and getting them to look right. Now that we've got that one done, let's start working on the upper arm. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to bring this elbow back a little bit, and then of course I'm going to bring the forearm up and back in alignment with it so that it looks like it's rotating along the correct position. And that should be about correct, I believe. We'll do that. You just have to do whatever looks visually correct to you. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to this. This is all artistic, and so if you want, parts of the elbow joint to still show through, you can. If you want to have the arm, cranked way up where it's passing through the forearm, you can do that too. Now, one of the things I thought might be interesting to do with this would be to, first of all, I'm going to make the arms splayed a little bit, so it's not just bending at the elbow. It's also going to rotate a little bit at the elbow, which gives it that organic feeling of dynamism, or however you say it, dynamic pose. Now, I did separate the hand, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and I'm going to call it 8M3, because I can always go back to my original before I started all these adjustments. Okay, now, if I wanted to, what I could do is I could actually separate just the hand here, and I could make the fingers extended, like the hand has the fingers out and splayed out, like, kind of doing this jazz hands kind of thing where it's really dynamic. Or I might do the other arm where the hand is partially opened. One of the reasons I'm not going to do that is because I noticed on one of my other models where I did this, it really flayed out fingers, is when I went to print it, the fingers broke off. So that's another thing you got to consider. It looks great, but when you try and print it, unless you're printing it huge, you might end up just making it unworkable. In this case, I'm just going to leave the hands as they are, and I think this looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and combine these, and then I'm going to mirror it, because remember, you can't mirror a separated object. You can only mirror a fixed object that is one piece. And I'm going to put this in place and make sure that they line up so that the same amount is roughly sticking out of both sides, and that looks about right to me. Okay. And then on our leg, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to go ahead and combine all of these objects, and now we're going to mirror the leg, and we're going to bring it over and in. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can do it visually by eyeballing. You can bring it in until the line is dead center of your model. Or sometimes, maybe it might actually be off due to the change. Like when I do the walking pose, I'm actually going to be rotating the hip a little bit, and the upper body will be twisting a little, and it will not only be twisting from side to side, but it'll be twisting from left to right. And so there will be two planes of movement that will be occurring on the walking pose that will make this give it that organic feel of movement instead of just a static robot that is trying to move on these fixed points, and it would look very jerky. And battle mechs are supposed to be able to move as well as humans, so that is what I would call a pretty good pose. I mean, it's bent down, it's got the squat going, it's got the arms coming out a little more. There's that feeling of dynamic movement. Everything is as far extreme as I can make it without it actually passing through each other. And I feel like that's a pretty good pose. One other thing I could do, potentially, this is another little visual, is I could take this large laser and I could actually rotate it just a hair so that it is still in alignment with the orientation of the horizon. I don't know if you guys have ever seen like a modern day tank. When they are moving over terrain, the barrel seems to float independently of the rest of the body because the barrel is still aimed at the original target. And if I left it as it was, the laser would actually be aiming down at the ground as opposed to trying to take aim at the mech in front of it, which might be at a distance away because the LRMs was the point of this firing stance. So I'm going to call that good. I'm going to save this, and I am going to go ahead and export it. So I'm going to grab all the objects and make sure there's nothing left. Okay, we're going to combine it, and we're going to export this, and we're going to call this 8M Archer Crouch, something like that. And so that'll take a second. And I did put out a request for people to give me comments on what they might like for me to make videos on, because I'm just trying to find things that are interesting. One of the requests was to show how to make a mech completely from scratch. First of all, that would be an extremely long video. And secondly, the things that I just showed you with creating these little pivots, these little pistons, basically it would be hours and hours of creating objects like this, stacking them on top of each other, putting them in the correct locations, and figuring out how you want to do your placement, because that's really all you're looking at there, is to just spend the time making these objects one at a time and then stacking them together. you know, and it's just a long, tedious process. I don't want that, you know, to sound dismissive that I'm not willing to make a video on how to make a mech from scratch, but you know, if you can grab a part that's already been made that fits your need, that's the beauty of the 3D file sharing, is you can go grab a gear or a cog off of a part that's not even for a mech, and you can throw it in there because it looks great for the part, you know. Why bother recreating the wheel when you can just go grab a part that somebody else has done? Because this is just like scratch building with plastic, you know, where they did in Star Wars the Millennium Falcon. They used car parts and parts from trains and different things, and they just stick it together until it looks like a new object. And that's what we're doing here. Now, surely you can go in and create completely 100% brand new objects, especially if there's nothing that corresponds to it in pre-existing files. But why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? That's my philosophy. There's a lot of great work out there already done. You just got to start looking at shapes and try and figure out what will meet your need for this particular instance. So, all right, I'm going to leave this video here. Actually, I will show you one more thing. I'm going to show you how I will fix this object now in my Autodesk Netfab. And so what I'm going to do is, since I have to bring this object in to Autodesk, I'm going to have to run it through the repair process, which will then fix it as a solid object. So I'm going to go in here and add the part, and I'm going to go in and find my Archer, and there's my file, and it's 110 megs. And when it comes in, it's also going to be oriented wrong, because for some reason my MeshMixer seems to orient all the mechs facing backwards. I don't know why. Not a big deal, but yeah, you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this blue circle, which represents the blue plane, which is the horizontal plane, and I'm just going to rotate it until it's facing me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to prepare and run repair script. And this is built-in stuff. You don't have to create these. And I'm just going to say execute. And it's going to go through. It's going to plug all the holes. It's going to fix any flaws. It's going to remove any objects that shouldn't be in there. And it's going to simplify the model and make it a single piece so that you don't have to do anything to it. Now, if I were to take the model as it is at 110 megs, upload it, and you to grab it, you could bring it into your MeshMixer and hit separate shells, and you would get every single object in this model because it has not been fixed. And while that might be something that you would want, so that you win and not have to start redoing all of my work again, you know, bringing in hundreds of little bitty objects, these little vents, and the finger, the little laser would be an object, and so you will end up with a great deal of things that will end up having to recompile, put together. I'm perfectly fine sharing unfixed files. I'm not trying to stop anybody from using my models. It's just normally people just want to grab the file and print it as it is. So if there is somebody that would like, you know, an unaltered file, you can do that. Or send you my thingy saved file and work from that, and then you don't even have to start from scratch. Actually take up one of my projects where it's already working with it. I'm perfectly fine with sharing all of my files with everyone, and that's why I'm making these videos, to help other artists and new people get into this so that they can create their own mechs and make new things for the community. And I think sharing is always a better approach than trying to hoard and keep everything secret. And I'm not going to show you how I do this because I want to, you know, just keep getting paid for it. You know, everybody's got a talent. Some people can do this, some people can't. If you can't, that's fine. You know, you can always commission somebody to do this for you. And if you can, great. It empowers you to make whatever model you want. So there's our finished crouch model. I'm gonna go here and export this guy as an STL. And I'm actually just gonna overwrite the original file just because I don't need it. I can always export this again from the MeshMixer project. And I'm gonna see how big this is. So yes, and then let's go back in here and see. Now it's gone down to 12 megs versus 110. So I think that shows you basically what you have to do to fix these models and stuff. If anybody doesn't have access to NetFab, you can send me a PM or an email and I can make arrangements for you. I'll leave it at that. So this is a great tool that you can do full 3D modeling in this as well. I just don't know how to do that in here. I'm only working in MeshMixer at the time, but I know a lot of people create full mechs from scratch in this and don't use MeshMixer. MeshMixer, can't talk. So anyway, hope this guy helps you. Hope it inspires you to make some new models, and we'll get our files put back up somewhere and they'll still be accessible, and we'll all have a good time sharing these and talking about what cool new things we've discovered. So I'm going to stop the video here, and I wish you all well. Thank you.